Okay, hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Speed Mooting Conversations with Counsel podcast. And we've got a very special episode for you today because our guest is Emma Bowie, who is the Chambers Manager at 18 St John Street. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to have you on. We've known you for a while, Emma. Of course, 18 St John Street exhibited at our pupillage fair last year, and of course you were heading up that stand, so it's great to have you on the podcast.
It's great to be here.
Yeah? Well, we're going to start with a nice fun icebreaker, a nice easy question to ease you in. So, Emma, if you could have dinner with any historical figure, alive or dead, who would it be?
So I gave this a lot of thought. The person that I've picked is, and some people may laugh or say, who is he? Is Gary Neville. For those people that don't know who Gary Neville is, or they'll be surprised if they don't, he was a former Manchester United player. I am a Manchester United fan, and that isn't the reason why he is the person that I would like to have dinner with. Why I would like to have dinner with him is for a number of reasons. I think I can relate to him quite well. First of all, when he was at Manchester United, he showed loyalty, commitment, emotion. He had a very hard work ethic. He was very much a team player, but whilst developing his own career for his own needs. All these factors I certainly can relate to in the role that I hold at 18 St John Street, as in being someone who wants to build a career for themselves whilst appreciating the support and network they've got around them. He's also got adaptability, which I think is a good key strength to have. When he left Manchester United, he moved into a managing role at Valencia, which unfortunately didn't end well for him, but it didn't let it beat him. No. He then went and built a university in Manchester alongside some of his former teammates, which is now called UA92, which is assisting a lot of young people in developing their career, not only in sport, but other areas as well. He became a shareholder stroke owner of Salford City FC, and has developed that club amazingly over the past 10 years. And he's currently building up an empire around Manchester. His most recent project being St Michael's, which is going to be a consortium of restaurants, offices, hotels. So, as I said before, whilst developing his own career in a different number of areas, he's developed jobs. He's provided people with an opportunity to develop in their education. And he's always so committed to any of the business areas that he works in. And he's so hardworking, but he also ensures that he gets time out with his family, or as he's been, or if people have said his mini retirements, as he calls them. I think us normal folk call them holidays.
Yeah.
So that's why I find him just so interested in the way that his career's developed over the years.
Yeah, wow, that's an answer I wasn't expecting. And I have to say, I've just learned so much about Gary Neville. I mean, I knew about the football team he'd set up because I think that was with a few of the other ex-Man United players, wasn't it? But I didn't know about the university, so that's really interesting. Yeah, he's definitely someone that likes to give back, isn't he?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Well, we won't turn this into a Gary Neville podcast. We'll move on. we'll move on to the law. So we'll start with your role as a Chambers Manager. And I have to say, you're quite unique in that sense because you're the first ever Chambers Manager to appear on this podcast. Hopefully not the last. So we'll start with a nice easy one. Can you tell us about your journey into becoming a Chambers Manager and also why you decided to take that career path?
So I left school many years ago, in 1993. Probably before most of the people watching this podcast were born. And I didn't go to college or university. Instead, I did an apprenticeship and worked for a well-known solicitors in Manchester. I ended up building a relationship with two of the partners in that firm, who then went on and opened up their own solicitors practice. And they took me with them, having only been there for 3 years. And 24 years later, I was still working for them, having developed from being an office clerk, doing photocopying, filing, runs to courts and barristers' chambers, and became a secretary, and then became the admin manager for the company that was set up. So very similar in a way to what I currently do now. And that's basically it. We were then bought by a large corporation who have got a number of offices around the country. I went with them. I enjoyed that role, but I missed the what I would class the personal touch. Being in a smaller environment. And as luck had it, I was approached by a recruitment agency who said, well, we've seen your CV. We've got a role at Barristers Chambers. It looks to be right up your street in terms of the different areas that you cover. Do you want to come for an interview? And as they say, the rest is history. I've always wanted to work in a Barristers Chambers. What I found quite surprising when I joined was how different they operate to a firm of solicitors.
Yeah. Well, that funnily enough, that was going to be my next question. What are some of the differences that you notice between a chambers and a law firm?
So all barristers' chambers can be different in how they operate, but obviously the majority of barristers in the country are all self-employed, whereas being solicitors, it's always been a company. So, it's headed up by partners and with solicitors, paralegals, etc. underneath them. And it's about, how much money can we make for the company?
Yeah.
But for a barrister's chambers, it's different because obviously the barristers are self-employed. It's a strange way to look at it in a way because obviously we want to make as much profit as such for the barristers, but like I said, they're very much self-employed. But that doesn't stop them from, like I've said, going back to the Gary Neville question, being a team player,
Yeah.
looking out for the department and looking out for chambers as a whole. I think what I'm trying to say is that the regulatory element and also the finance element is very different to a solicitor's office.
Yeah, yeah, I've certainly noticed that because I've worked in firms for many years as a paralegal. Then when I qualified as a solicitor, and then as you say, you go into a barrister's chambers and it's completely different, and it's very difficult to explain to someone who's on the outside, isn't it? Because you've got a team of however many people are in your chambers, 20, 50, 100, 200, doesn't matter. A team of individuals, but in effect, you're still there for the one sort of core purpose, which is what that chambers is there for. And even though, as a barrister, you're there, trying to build your own practice, you are still a part of a team, a crime
Yeah.
team, family team, and you're there helping each other out. So it's a very interesting dynamic and quite difficult to explain to somebody
Very
who's
unique. I always say it's very unique.
yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So in terms of your day-to-day role then, what does that involve?
Well, no one day's the same. I cover a wide area of the chamber's operational functions. What I normally say to people when they ask me what I do is I do everything other than clerk the barristers.
Right.
That's what my chambers director is responsible for. So we have two teams. We have the chambers director and the clerks underneath him who deal with the day-to-day diary management of the barristers' diaries, getting in new work, creating relationships with new and existing clients. I do everything else with my team. So I'm responsible for the general finances of chambers, which includes, doing a budget for the forthcoming financial year. So we can then calculate what percentage the barristers will be paying on their fees. I also oversee a team of billing clerks who bill the barristers' work and chase the fees to get them in.
Yeah.
I cover IT. So I'm not an IT guru, but whenever someone joins, it's my responsibility to deal with getting them set up on the systems, assigning them accounts for Westlaw, Thomson Reuters, etc.,
Yeah.
making sure they've got their insurance cover, the practicing certificates. I also deal with recruitment of staff. I deal with the pupillage recruitment and any tenancy applications we get, which is obviously how we met, doing the pupillage fair, and then building management. So, in short, you name it, other than clerking, I do it.
Pretty much everything, making sure that the show stays on the road, as it were.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So I know you've just sort of touched about on it very briefly there. But can you explain how, for the benefit of the audience, how a barrister's earnings works within the sort of chambers environment?
Yeah, so there are obviously different providers, different solicitors that instruct barristers. You can have private fees, conditional fees, legal aid, etc.
Yeah.
Which all depends on the type of case and the client that you're going to be acting for. When it comes round to the case having been dealt with, either a conference or a hearing, my team will bill those fees. There will either be fixed fees, like the legal aid agency, or fixed fees that we've agreed with a solicitor in advance of doing the work. They will then submit those fees. And obviously, once those fees come into chambers, which is many years ago, because barristers were self-employed, a lot of them got paid direct. The money didn't come into chambers as such, but for a number of reasons, most chambers now have centralised the payments, so all the payments come into a chamber's bank account. They're obviously processed on a daily basis, and at our chambers we then pay out to the member twice a week, and what we pay them at the moment is their net fees plus their VAT. However, with their net fees, we deduct the commission that's set
Yeah.
for that particular year,
Yeah.
which means that they then don't have to worry about having to pay that at a later stage. That was something that I actually introduced in our chambers this year, and it's worked really well. What the system also allows for us to do, and I think probably we'll touch on this later on from one of the questions, is we can pay it into up to 3 bank accounts. So it allows that barrister to manage their finances.
Yeah. That's a really good idea, and a little tip for any sort of you know junior barristers or people who might be about to start pupillage, I would say, think about that from the start. Think about having separate accounts, somewhere to keep your money for your VAT, somewhere to keep your money for your tax, etc. Because that creeps up, and your VAT's got to be paid out 4 times a year. Your tax you're paying, once a year. Plus, you got to do your payments on account. So make sure you sort of siphon off that money straight. So I think that's a really good idea, that Emma, having potentially
Well,
3 accounts.
the way it works on our system is as I've explained. So the net fees will go into what I call account 1. The VAT will go into account 2. And then the barrister can decide what percentage of the net fees they want to go in account 3. Now, they don't have to have 3 accounts. They can have 1, 2 or 3 accounts.
Yeah.
The system will allow for that. But whenever I meet our pupils when they're getting ready to go into their second 6, I always advise them to get the 3 accounts if they can,
Yeah.
but to put 50% aside, because as you've said, you've got your VAT, albeit that's in a separate account, but you've got your annual tax returns plus other expenses. Because chambers, whilst we have a percentage that covers items like salaries, IT, library, basic overheads, we do a lot of marketing events, and obviously that's department specific.
Right.
So we will do what's called a recharge to the barristers. So we might order bar mutual and practicing certificate payments. They can get quite hefty dependent on your income. So I always suggest that you try and put 50% away, just so that you've got it there in the background if it's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if that's more than what you need anyway, it's still a good figure to put away, just so you've got the money there for a rainy day, just in case.
Exactly what I was going to say then.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, in terms of the barristers, then, how would you say that they sort of contribute towards a smooth operation of chambers? So, beyond the practice of law and going to court, what can barristers do to help out in chambers, or to help chambers run smoothly?
So I think that sometimes coming into this profession, a lot of people think it's just about the court hearings, and it's not, because you've got to do your administration. So, I would say be organised and provide your attendance notes as soon as possible so that they can go on the case file. And also, more importantly for you guys, is that we can bill it, hopefully. Make sure that you've kept up to date with your regulatory requirements. So your practicing certificate, your bar mutual. Obviously, you have a CPD point requirement. I don't know if it's still 16 points a year. So it's keeping on top of, items like that. And obviously, being contactable and being flexible in some areas, because you might be called upon to do an urgent hearing because someone's ill or has got stuck in court at another hearing. So that makes the clerk's life a lot easier if we've got the flexibility of the barristers.
This video is brought to you by Speed Mooting. We are an organisation that help aspiring and junior lawyers. We run online and in-person advocacy and mooting competitions. We do online advocacy and public speaking training, and we run lots of other events to assist people on their legal journey. To learn more, visit our website, speedmooting.com. Yeah, and I think that's very important actually. So as you say, it might be that you're being asked to cover a hearing on behalf of another barrister last minute, and it could be you've got to travel for it or what have you. So it might be a bit of a pain covering that one hearing, but it could pay off long term because it might be for a solicitor you've never done any work for before. Lo and behold, you've built up a relationship and there's another stream of work for you as the barrister. So that's why it's so important to be flexible. It's not just helping chambers, it's potentially helping yourself as well. What are the key admin or operational aspects of chambers that aspiring barristers should be aware of at the beginning of their careers?
I think I've already touched on that point, to be honest, which is be organised.
Yeah.
If I use an example, we could have a department of 20 members, but we might only have one billing clerk for those 20 members. So obviously that billing clerk's responsibility is to get the fees in as quickly as possible and as regularly as possible for the barristers. But if someone isn't very organised and doesn't do their admin on a regular basis and then dumps 20 attendance notes in one go, that impacts everyone, including themselves. We get quite a lot of chasers from solicitors for attendance notes, for example, but actually in the main, most of our barristers, if not all of them, are really organised, and the systems that we have set up allow them to, we try and make their lives easy as possible. That's what we're there for.
Yeah, I agree. Best piece of advice I can give to any young barristers out there: get your notes done that day, because number one, from a financial point of view, it means the case can be billed there and then. But also, it's good for the solicitors as well, because your job as a barrister is to help your solicitors as much as you possibly can and make their life as easy as possible. So if you get the note out right away, it's always good. Or if you can't, ring them up and let the solicitor know what the result was. So that's always a good point.
I think as well, and it might not fall under this remit, but I thought I'd say it anyway, is obviously when a pupil joins chambers, they're assigned a pupil supervisor. And I think sometimes they don't appreciate that just because they've got a pupil supervisor, it doesn't mean that they're with that pupil supervisor for the whole first 6 anyway.
Yeah.
It's always so good for them to actually shadow other barristers within the same department, because they can pick up a lot of advice and ideas and look at how different barristers operate, and also get their own name and face out to solicitors in readiness for hopefully them passing the pupillage and setting up their own career.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice actually, and particularly if you're talking about departments where there's 20-30 people in it, there's so much scope for them to go and shadow other people. So I think that's a really good tip actually. Look into the future, so we're seeing obvious sort of advancements with technology and AI. How do you see these sort of developments interacting with the bar and chambers?
I must admit I'm a bit ignorant when it comes to AI, probably because I don't want it to come into play, because it could impact barristers' chambers quite significantly. I already know of a barrister group who have got an AI clerk. I was told that today when I asked the questions, whereby a solicitor just goes onto a portal, types in what area of business, what fee they want to pay, and the system draws out a raffle ticket and assigns someone. I think personally that isn't the right way to go. Whilst it might be a cost saving, you don't get that personal touch
No.
of the clerks or the barrister. Um, you might not get a barrister that you connect with because literally a computer's done it all for you. So I know that it is likely to, you know, become something of everyday office and chambers
Yeah.
work, but you can never ever get better than the personal touch.
No, not at all. I think a good clerk is worth the weight in gold.
Yeah,
They're irreplaceable, I would say. The only, in terms of, I mean, I was thinking about this as well. In terms of technology, I think it's probably the bulk of the change has come. Really, I think it's with the centralisation of all these systems, like the digital case system we use in
yeah,
crime. So, for example, I would never receive now a brief in a pink ribbon. Don't need to go to chambers. It's get an email. Here's your brief, or get an email. You're on the DCS, and it means I can travel wherever I want to in the country because I don't need to be in chambers at 8 o'clock to pick a brief up to go to court or what have
yeah.
you. So I think that's probably one of the big changes we've seen recently, and potentially for the better because it makes us a lot more flexible, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Moving on, I'm going to be looking for some wisdom from you now.
No.
So, looking for some advice for the aspiring lawyers and barristers out there. So, number one, what are some common misconceptions that aspiring barristers have got about the sort of lifestyle and the workload of the bar?
I think the first point is it's not a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
It's very much more than that. Obviously, doing your pupillage, you won't necessarily be doing 9 while 5. But when you get on your feet, as they call it, whether it be your second six or once you've been offered tenancy somewhere, you could be receiving instructions at 6, 7 o'clock in the evening for a hearing that's 10 in the morning. And you've got to be flexible. I also think a lot of the work that you can get in, not only as individually as a barrister, but also as a department member and a chambers member, is networking.
Yeah.
I think it's so important for people to network. And again, I think that could potentially be another difference between a barrister's chambers and a solicitor's office.
Mm.
Because, large solicitors' offices have marketing teams, executives, partners, directors who do all the marketing for you. Whereas actually, barristers predominantly get the work because of themselves and who they are.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Actually, something I didn't really think about when I was thinking about this question. Actually, but it's actually really crucial, isn't it? You are your own business. You've got to go out there. You've got to market yourself. But yeah, I mean, I can tell you from first-hand experience, this is not a 9 to 5 job. I mean, just to give an example, I'm in the middle of a multi-handed trial at the moment, and I've done all my prep beforehand. But every single day, something's coming up in court. There's a bad character application, or there's we need to look at agreed facts, whatever it is. So you're going home and you're doing work every single night on these cases. And this isn't even something whereby it's a new brief for tomorrow. It's just things that are coming up in the middle of the trial and new legal arguments we need to think about. So, yeah.
And then, yeah, and just as I've pointed out, you've then got to fit your networking in, which the majority of the time is after court, after a long day in court. You're going out with a client or clients, for a drink, something to eat. So, they are very long days, but you've also got to make sure you take the time out for yourself as well, because otherwise you will just burn out and make
Yeah.
mistakes potentially, and, you can't afford to in this area of business.
Yeah, very true. And I think that's the nice thing with being self-employed. So, you can work hard for a certain amount of time and say, do you know what? I'll take 3 weeks off now, have a holiday, whatever it might be. So you've got that flexibility to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges then for junior barristers today?
So, again, networking. You can only, but with barristers, for me, the clerks will do their best to put names forward.
Hmm.
But once a client or solicitor has built a relationship with a barrister, they tend to go for the same barristers where they can. So it's getting your face and name out there, as I mentioned earlier on. A perfect example is you kind of shadowing other different people within the department, because they'll have different clients who instruct them, going to as many networking events as possible. What I think is also a good idea for pupils and junior barristers is joining any networks that are available, particularly if they're in your department area. So, for example, crime, there's a website called Crime Line that provides advice and publishes regulatory changes that may have happened. Business and property, they have forums that you can join, memberships you can join that provide support and advice. Family, you've got Child Concern or the Family Law Bar Association. PI, you've got PIBA or AVMA. And all these organisations provide training, support. And then, of course, you've got the circuits. So obviously, we're part of the Northern Circuit.
Yeah.
And, I think it's just important to ensure that you get as many support networks as you can. But one of your biggest support networks are the people that work around you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great advice there. A similar sort of point now, for those who are making the jump from pupillage into tenancy, have you got any advice for people who are in that situation?
I think at our chambers, and I'm sure it's the same for other chambers, we give them that advice and tell them how to prepare during the second six. So they're very much on their own, but they're not in a way. And, I think we've touched on a number of aspects, which is get yourself prepared, not only from a business perspective, i.e. making sure you've got attendance notes and you're keeping good records of everything, but also from a personal point as well. We'll touch on it later, but for example, I always make time to go to the gym where I can in the morning before work. It sets me up for the day.
Yeah.
I drink plenty of coffee throughout the day to keep me going. So I think it's just, and getting advice off people is probably the best preparation on how they handled it from moving from being a pupil to a tenant.
Yeah, no, really great advice there. Last question on the law before we move on to the more fun questions. Like an interview, isn't it? Well, speaking of interviews, I understand that you're involved in pupillage recruitment. So
Yes.
what do you look for in a potential pupil?
So, first of all, when I say I'm involved in the pupillage recruitment, it's purely from the administrative side. But obviously, experience is the big one. What I'd suggest is, for people that are still at bar school, etc., just try and apply for as many mini pupillages as you can. Also, be yourself. I don't think there's any better way to put yourself across than actually being yourself, personalising your application almost. And I think that's it, really, to be honest. Having come from the background I've come from, I'm very much an advocate for younger people. We have a number of apprentices in our chambers,
Oh yeah.
who've left school, tried college, it's not been for them. And then we've got them either on a business apprenticeship or an accountancy one. And it does take a lot of training, but you actually get the longevity out and commitment out of them. I always try, obviously, like we said, the pupillage fair, doing this evening. We did an advocacy training session at weekend for bridging the bar. So I'm very much trying to give people that support and opportunity as much as I can.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And that's what it's all about. There's some people that just need a chance. They just need sort of an opportunity. So, that's, very commendable. All the tough questions are over now. We'll move on to
Yay.
the rapid fire ones. Early mornings or late nights?
So, as I touched on a minute ago, early mornings. I'm very much one of these people. When I wake up, I get up and I'm straight out the doors almost, whether it be to go to the gym or just go straight to chambers. And then I like to go home and relax at night.
Don't blame you. Favorite all-time movie?
Now, it could be one of two. Die Hard, believe it or not. I just love the film and can watch it over again. Or Back to the Future.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, two good ones. I actually went to see Back to the Future on the theatre in Manchester.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, it was really good there, actually. Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
quite sure how they could make it into a theatre production, but then there's other films they've made into theatre productions, and I thought, how have they possibly done that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't go to the theatre that often. I think I've probably been twice in the past few years. And what they do is they kind of have like all these props on stage, and then there's kind of a background. It lights up and all the rest of it. So I had the same reservations before I went in. Thought, how on earth is this going to work? But believe it or not, it was all right actually. Okay, if you could master any skill instantly, what would it be?
I don't know. Is the honest answer. I've been rattling my brains for weeks with that question. And you could say be invisible and just see what goes on, around you
Yeah.
without people knowing you're there, or fly. Probably, actually, now I've just said that, I love my holidays. And the hotter the holiday, the better. So creating some form of machine that would get me to these hot, exotic places straight away rather than a 13-hour flight.
Amazing. And then, last but not least, what's your go-to way to unwind after a long day of work?
A glass of wine.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a brilliant place to end it. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat. I've learned a lot as well. Hope you've enjoyed coming on the podcast, and no doubt our listeners have enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoying our videos? Then we'd be super grateful if you could take a moment and subscribe to our channel.